games, Berube can decide to dial up the minutes for the fourth line or dial up the minutes for the third line. And there are some games where that Waugh line isn't the third line and they're playing as much as Tavares, and they're just based on who's going or based on situations, right? If they need a goal, you play a different line, like Lawton and Lorentz probably play less just because they're looking for a goal a lot of that game and the opponent and things like that. But if they're playing defensively, like if they were up 3-1 in that game, potentially that fourth line plays more than the third line. And that's great that you've got the functionality that of the different lines, the way you can use them and the minutes you can give them, and that's the way that it should be. And it hasn't been for too long because it's been such a two-line team, with the way that with the cap being flat. And I mean, we don't have to relitigate everything that happened with the roster the last few years, but it's been very much a tale of two teams, and all the guys at the top making a lot of money and getting all the minutes, and then your bottom six, you're just trying to get by. And as a viewer, you're watching and you're just waiting for the big guys to go over the board so something will happen, whereas now every line can make something happen. And you've got to go. I'm trying to think when the last time that would be. I mean, maybe early in the rebuild years when you had the luxury of, you had JVR and Bozak on the third line, and then you had dangerous players, you had Kadri, you had Matthews, you were really stacked at center. That's probably the last time that they had this luxury of where you could get something down the lineup night to night the way they are right now.
Yeah, and as exciting as those times were, and there was absolutely more depth, and I think that's the right answer to the counter, your stars were still in their infancy. Right? And as much as they were putting up points, and Matthews showed up game one and scores 4 goals, and he had the beauty against the Washington Capitals where it was like the lacrosse style goal. Those guys were not established to the degree that they are now. Austin Matthews is a far more complete player than he was in the early stages of his career. So I think that you are seeing not only that balance, but the evolution of those star players. So to me, there's a couple things. I think that the injuries happened at the right time, gave guys roles where the Leafs were forced to lean on them. It moved their hand out of something that they were comfortable with, get more guys to play major minutes. 2 is, we had a lot of conversations about whether or not the pieces were correct, more specifically about Michelli and Dakota Joshua than they were about Waugh. Because even when he was having his worst games, I never got the sense people couldn't appreciate some of the things that he did and how different he looked from third-line centers that they've had in years past outside of the Ryan O'Reilly edition. But I always had this feel that one of the issues with the Leafs was that no matter what your depth was, they were not going to be able to implant or plant their DNA onto the stars, right? That the premise of you have these types of players who are a little bit more passive personalities, who are a little bit more up and down when it comes to their style of play and it being aggressive. It doesn't matter who you add down the lineup. You're not going to be able to change the vibe of the team, the ethic or the ethos of the team. And whether it was bringing in Stetcher at the right time, whether it was Lawton returning when he did, I really do feel in my bones that those two guys in particular, and others deserve credit too, but those two guys I think are the poster childs for changing the attitude around this team. That those two guys came in with a level of desperation, a level of play, a level of passion, a level of just good personality mix with the hockey club, and that as they started to win, that started to permeate a little bit throughout the roster. And now you're seeing that rub off on everyone, and everyone start to play a little bit more like those two with that added level of desperation.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't even know. I don't really have a counter to that. I think you're 100% right. And not having Lawton early in the year, I mean, there were snide comments about, oh, you don't have a fourth line center and it throws everything into disarray. But, he's so much more than that. And I know you and Sammy on your show, and I've been saying it too, that Lawton should be playing more. I mean, he is a pace setter for this team, and he's a leader, and he really struggled coming in last year. I mean, what did he have, 4 points in 20 games or something like that?
And he was a no-show in the playoffs.
And then you watch him this year, he misses a huge chunk of the first half with that broken foot suffered in preseason, and he's been fantastic. He's their second best defensive forward behind Matthews. He's led the penalty kill way up the charts in terms of where now it's one of the best penalty kills in the league. And even when he's only playing 12 minutes, he's just killing himself out there to leave everything that he's got on the line. And there's talk. I was talking to our Flyers writer, and like they're talking in Philadelphia, like we got to get that guy back. The Flyers are looking like potentially they could be a playoff team, and they're saying we miss this guy and we wish we had him. And that game where the Leafs go in there and they honor him, all the conversation from Flyers fans is like, boy, how did we let that one get away? Whereas early in the season we were talking about giving up the first round pick for him and how bad that trade looks right now, and there's not a lot of conversation around that right now.
Well, conversely, additionally, imagine they had made the Braden Shen trade. Not to say like he's not a good player, that he wouldn't be fitting in with this team, but if you get Braden Shen, you're losing Easton Cowan. You're also losing that draft pick. You're losing more in the cupboards to acquire him. He's making more money. And you've also got Luke Shen on the books because you were forced to make that move as well. It was a coinciding move, according to Nick Kyprios, where they had to add both of them. And just what the value add is of Braden Shen versus what you're getting from Lawton right now. I'm just not sure what the difference is in terms of how much more you would have had to pay by throwing in your very best prospect into that trade. And like, listen, he makes money too. Lawton right now is what? Because is he retained?
Yes.
Right.
So he only makes 1.5 on the cap.
Right. So he's a $3 million guy, but he makes 1.5 on the cap. The cap space has turned out to be unbelievably important for this team for the reason of you're really seeing what the difference is of having bona fide NHL players down your roster instead of a collection of 4A guys who are a little too good for the Marlies, but not quite good enough for the NHL.
Yeah. And even the luxury, Stetcher's not making a lot of money, but you can just bring people in when you need them. And you can carry extra players on the roster. You can have a competition for those spots. And when they were healthy and they were they had the luxury of sitting Michelli or sitting Joshua and motivating those guys and pushing them. And, when you're rayed out maxed against the cap and you have a league minimum roster of 20 players, you can't do that. You're waiting for an injury for someone to come up and change the mix. So, they've had a lot more flexibility that way. And some of the injuries have given them that flexibility too. Put Stolars on LTIR and all of a sudden you've got money that you can play with. And, they've used that pretty well. So, a lot of the talk coming into the year, remember in training camp, how many forwards they had and they were going to have to dump somebody, and how are they going to find minutes for everybody? And it's probably going to have to be 2 forwards that go. And, it turns out Kampf is the one that goes. You get out of that cap hit entirely. And, I'm working on a piece now looking at their cap situation. And if they do want to do something at the deadline, they've got lots of flexibility to do what they want to do. And the thing too, with how everyone's played up front, no one's talking about them needing a top 6 forward right now. Yeah. I mean, they're one of the highest scoring teams in the league. I think last I looked, they were 5th. They're probably higher than that now. If the power play gets going, offense isn't a problem. So really all you'd be looking to do is use some of that cap space to bring in a defenseman. And that's a tale as old as time with this team. If you look at all the defensemen that they brought in at the deadline over the years. But, and the only question is going to be, is it going to be a grade A, a top pair guy? Is it going to be a second pair guy? Or is it going to be someone who's a depth defenseman? And they've got some time here before the Olympic break to see what this group of 6 that they've got looks like, and to further evaluate Tanev and see if they think he might be back by the playoffs. And then they're going to have to make a decision because the trade deadline is going to be basically right after the Olympic break.
So they absolutely can make an addition. I'm still not a big believer that they will make one of major significance, simply because I think Easton Cowan is now harder to move than he was even a year ago when he was in trade rumors. That the idea that you would move him for anything short of a bona fide star player is likely not going to happen. And my guess is that he's also not a prospect or player of consequence great enough where a team would look at him and say, yeah, we'll do that trade where he's the absolute centerpiece coming back. They still don't really have their draft picks. Everyone I talk